Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called Running into Each Other at the Hotel. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely, thank you. Running into each other at the hotel. The Chicago skyline glittered like a constellation of dreams, its towering spires piercing the velvet dusk as Emma Carter stepped out of the taxi. The air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city horns, laughter, and the distant clink of wine glasses from rooftop bars. She adjusted the strap of her leather satchel, her fingers brushing against the soft curve of her collarbone, exposed by the deep V-neck of her emerald green blouse. At 28, Emma was a vision of understated allure. Her auburn hair cascaded in loose waves over her shoulders, catching the glow of the streetlights like molten copper. Her hazel eyes, flecked with gold, shimmered with a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. Her figure was a study in elegant slender, yet softly curved, her hips swaying subtly in tailored black trousers that hugged her long legs. Every step she took, in her low-heeled boots, echoed confidence, though her body ached from the 6-hour flight from Seattle. The Hotel Elysian loomed before her, a grand relic of Chicago's Gilded Age. Its facade was all carved stone and arched windows, promising old-world charm with a whisper of mystery. Emma's lips, full and lightly glossed, curved into a tired smile as she pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby enveloped her in warmth, its crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over marble floors and plush velvet armchairs. The scent of jasmine and sandalwood lingered in the air, mingling with the faint tang of her own Perfumia blend of vanilla and amber that clung to her skin like a second lover. At the check-in desk, a harried young clerk with a name tag reading Lila handed over a key card for room 504. "You're all set, Miss Carter," Lila said, her voice clipped but polite. "Elevators to your right. Enjoy your stay." Emma murmured her thanks, her voice soft and slightly husky from fatigue. She tugged her small suitcase behind her, the wheels whispering against the marble as she made her way to the elevator. Her reflection flickered in the polished brass doors, a woman who looked both poised and vulnerable. Her cheeks flushed from the chill outside, her lips parted as she exhaled. She ran a hand through her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear, unaware of how the gesture accentuated the delicate line of her jaw, the way her neck arched like a swan's. The elevator dinged, and she stepped into the hushed corridor of the 5th floor. The walls were lined with damask wallpaper, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and fresh linens. Room 504 was at the far end, its brass number plate gleaming under a sconce. Emma swiped her keycard, the lock clicking with a satisfying snap. She pushed the door open, expecting the quiet sanctuary of a crisp hotel bed and a glass of wine from the minibar. Instead, she froze. A man stood in the center of the room, his back to her, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of a table lamp. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of a charcoal gray blazer. His dark hair, slightly tousled, caught the light, revealing hints of chestnut in its depths. He was unpacking a leather duffel, his movements fluid and unhurried, as if the room belonged to him alone. A navy sweater hugged his torso, hinting at the lean muscle beneath, and his dark jeans clung to his thighs in a way that suggested both strength and grace. One hand rested on the edge of the dresser, his fingers long and tapered, the kind that looked made for turning pages or tracing secrets across skin. Emma's breath caught, her heart stuttering as she gripped the doorframe. The room was intimate, its king-sized bed draped in creamy linens, a velvet chaise by the window, overlooking the city's twinkling lights. A bottle of bourbon sat on the nightstand, half empty, next to a single glass. The air carried a faint trace of his Colonna cedarwood and leather, warm and intoxicating, curling around her senses like a whispered invitation. "Excuse me," Emma said, her voice sharper than intended, though it still held that husky edge. She stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind her. "I think there's been a mistake." The man turned, and Emma's world tilted. His face was a study in rugged beauty, high cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with a day's worth of stubble, and eyes the color of a stormy sea-deep blue, piercing, with lashes that were unfairly long. His lips, full and slightly parted, curved into a slow, surprised smile that sent a shiver down her spine. He looked to be in his early 30s, with the kind of presence that filled a room not just with his height, but with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice low and smooth, like whiskey over ice. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that felt like a touch. His gaze lingered on her face, then drifted briefly to the curve of her neck, the way her blouse clung to the swell of her chest. It wasn't leering, just appreciative, curious, as if he were memorizing her. "I'm Daniel Brooks, and I'm pretty sure this is my room." Emma's cheeks warmed, but she held her ground, crossing her arms under her chest, unaware of how the motion accentuated her curves. "Emma Carter," she said, lifting her chin. "And I have a confirmation for room 504, right here." She pulled her phone from her satchel, her fingers brushing against the soft leather, and showed him the email from the hotel. Daniel stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough to see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, a silvery line that only added to his allure. He leaned in to glance at her screen, his breath stirring the air near her cheek. "Well, damn," he murmured, his voice tinged with amusement. "Looks like we're both right." Emma's lips twitched, despite herself. "Or the hotel's very wrong." He straightened, his smile widening, revealing a dimple in his left cheek that made her stomach flutter. "Let's find out." He gestured toward the phone on the dresser. "Mind if I call down?" "Go ahead," she said, stepping back to give him space, though the room suddenly felt too small, too charged. She set her suitcase by the bed, her fingers lingering on the handle as she watched him. The way he moved was mesmerizing, confident, but not cocky, his long legs carrying him with an easy grace. When he picked up the receiver, his sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a glimpse of a tattoo on his inner wrist, a quill pen, its lines sharp and intricate, a nod to his craft as a writer. The conversation with the front desk was brief but frustrating. Emma caught snippets, something about a booking error, no available rooms, and an apology that sounded more perfunctory than sincere. Daniel hung up, turning to face her, his expression a mix of exasperation and wry humor. "Bad news," he said, running a hand through his hair, mussing it in a way that made him look even more devastating. "They double-booked us, hotel's fully occupied, and they can't sort it out until morning. Apparently, we're stuck." Emma's heart thudded, a mix of annoyance and something else, something warmer, more dangerous. "Stuck?" she echoed, her voice softer now, her eyes locked on his. The room seemed to pulse with possibility, the city lights casting shadows that danced across his face, highlighting the sharp angle of his jaw, the curve of his lips. "Unless you want to sleep in the lobby," Daniel said, his tone teasing but his gaze steady, searching. "Or I can. Your call, Emma." She swallowed, her throat dry, her body hyper-aware of his proximity, of the way his sweater clung to the planes of his chest, the way his hands rested casually in his pockets, as if he weren't standing there looking like every fantasy she'd never admitted to having. The idea of sharing this room with him, this stranger who already felt like more, sent a thrill through her, part fear, part curiosity, all heat. "Let's figure this out," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a decision that could change everything. The air in room 504 crackled with an unspoken challenge, as if the universe itself had conspired to trap Emma Carter and Daniel Brooks in this intimate cocoon. The Chicago skyline sparkled beyond the window, a distant galaxy of lights that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Emma's quickening heartbeat. She stood near the bed, her auburn hair catching the soft glow of the lamp, each strand shimmering like spun copper. Her emerald blouse clung to her frame, accentuating the gentle swell of her breasts and the dip of her waist, where her tailored trousers hugged the curve of her hips. At 28, Emma was a paradox of strength and softness. Her long legs, toned from years of morning runs, gave her a statuesque grace, while her hazel eyes, flecked with gold, betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. Her lips, full and lightly glossed, parted slightly as she processed Daniel's words, "Your call, Emma." Daniel leaned against the dresser, his tall frame relaxed, yet commanding, like a panther at rest but ready to pounce. His charcoal blazer had been discarded, revealing the navy sweater that molded to his broad chest and tapered waist, hinting at the lean muscle beneath. His dark jeans hugged his thighs, the fabric stretching just enough to suggest power in every step. At 32, Daniel Brooks was a man who wore his rugged beauty effortlessly, his jawline sharp, dusted with stubble that begged to be touched, and his stormy blue eyes framed by lashes that seemed to hold secrets. His dark hair, slightly mussed, fell over his forehead, and when he ran a hand through it, the motion revealed the quill tattoo on his inner wrist, its inky lines a whisper of his writer's soul. His column of cedar wood and leather lingered in the air, wrapping around Emma like a warm embrace, making her skin tingle. "Figure this out?" Emma repeated, her voice soft but laced with a playful defiance. She tilted her head, her hair spilling over one shoulder, exposing the delicate curve of her neck. The gesture was unconscious, but it drew Daniel's gaze, his eyes tracing the line of her collarbone, the faint pulse at her throat. "You're awfully calm for someone who just found out they're sharing a room with a stranger." Daniel's lips curved into a slow, devastating smile, the kind that could unravel a woman's resolve. "Stranger?" he said, his voice low and smooth, like velvet draped over steel. "We've already exchanged names and booking confirmations, Emma. I'd say we're at least acquaintances now." He took a step closer, his boots silent on the plush carpet, and the space between them shrank, charged with a current that made her breath hitch. Emma crossed her arms, the motion lifting her chest slightly, her blouse stretching taut. She was aware of his eyes on her, not leering but appreciative, as if he were savoring every detail, the way her lips quirked, the way her fingers curled against her biceps. "Acquaintances don't share hotel rooms," she countered, but her tone was lighter now, teasing, as if she were testing the waters of this unexpected game. "Then let's make a deal," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate and inviting. He gestured to the room, the king-sized bed with its creamy linens, the velvet chaise by the window, the bottle of bourbon glinting on the nightstand. One night, we share the space, set some ground rules, and in the morning, we let the hotel fix their mess. No lobby sleeping required. Emma's heart thudded, a mix of caution and curiosity swirling in her chest. She studied him, taking in the way his sweater clung to the planes of his torso, the way his hands rested casually in his pockets, fingers long and elegant, made for crafting stories or tracing the curve of a lover's spine. His face was open, his expression a blend of humor and sincerity, but there was something else in his eyesheet, restrained but undeniable, like a fire banked but ready to flare. "Ground rules?" she asked, arching a brow. She stepped toward the chaise, her hips swaying subtly, and perched on its edge, crossing one leg over the other. The motion drew his gaze to her legs, the way her trousers hugged her thighs, the delicate curve of her ankle. "Like what? You stay on your side of the room, I stay on mine?" Daniel chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent a shiver through her. "That's a start," he said, moving to the bed and sitting on its edge, facing her. The mattress dipped under his weight, and Emma couldn't help but notice the way his jeans stretched over his thighs, the way his shoulders rolled as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "How about I get the bed, you get the chaise, or we flip a coin? I'm flexible." Emma's lips twitched, a smile breaking through her guard. "Flexible, huh?" she said, her voice taking on a teasing lilt. "That's a bold claim for an acquaintance." She leaned back slightly, her hair spilling over the velvet, her posture relaxed but deliberate, inviting his gaze to linger on the curve of her waist, the way her blouse hinted at the softness beneath. Daniel's eyes darkened, just for a moment, before he grinned, leaning back on his hands. The motion stretched his sweater across his chest, revealing the faintest outline of his pecs, the subtle ridge of his collarbone. "I'm full of bold claims," he said, his tone light but his gaze steady, holding hers. "But I'm also a gentleman. Your comfort comes first." The word comfort hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Emma felt a flush creep up her neck, warming her skin, but she held his gaze, refusing to look away. "Fine," she said, her voice softer now, almost a challenge. "We share the room, but I'm taking the bed. You can have the chaise, the floor." Daniel laughed, the sound warm and unguarded, filling the room with a lightness that eased the tension, if only slightly. "Deal," he said, standing and offering her a mock bow, his movements fluid and theatrical. "But I'm keeping the bourbon. You want a glass?" Emma hesitated, then nodded, her curiosity outweighing her caution. "Only if you're pouring," she said, her lips curving into a smile that was equal parts playful and daring. He moved to the nightstand, his back to her, and she watched the way his shoulders flexed as he reached for the bottle, the way his jeans hugged the curve of his backside. Every movement was deliberate, unhurried, as if he knew she was watching and was giving her time to take him in. He poured 2 glasses, the amber liquid catching the light, and turned to hand her one. Their fingers brushed as she took the glass, a fleeting touch that sent a spark through her, making her pulse race. "Two unexpected roommates," Daniel said, raising his glass, his eyes locked on hers, the storm in them swirling with something new: intrigue, desire, a promise of more. Emma clinked her glass against his, her smile widening. "To surviving the night," she replied, her voice husky, the words carrying a weight she hadn't intended. They sipped in silence for a moment, the bourbon smooth and warm, loosening the edges of their nerves. Emma settled back on the chaise, her legs stretched out, her body relaxed but hyper-aware of his presence. Daniel returned to the bed, sitting closer to her now, his knee just inches from hers. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the space itself were conspiring to draw them closer. "So," Daniel said, his voice breaking the silence, his tone casual but curious, "what brings you to Chicago, Emma Carter, besides stealing my room, of course?" She laughed, the sound soft and genuine, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, revealing the delicate shell of her ear, the faint freckle just below it. "I'm here for a design conference," she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "I'm a graphic designer, Seattle's home, but I needed a change of pace." "You?" "Writer," he said simply, his lips quirking. "New York's my chaos, but I'm here for a book signing tomorrow, and to escape the city for a bit." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers. "What kind of design? The kind that makes the world prettier? Or the kind that makes it think?" Emma's heart skipped at the question, at the way he seemed genuinely interested, not just making small talk. "A bit of both," she said, her voice softening. "I love creating things that feel alive, logos, posters, book covers, things that tell a story." She paused, then added, "Like your tattoo, maybe. There's a story there, right?" Daniel's eyes flicked to his wrist, then back to her, a spark of surprise in his gaze. "You noticed that," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. He rolled up his sleeve slightly, revealing the quill in full, its lines sharp and elegant. "It's for the first book I published, a reminder that stories are my lifeblood." Emma leaned forward, drawn in despite herself, her eyes tracing the ink, the way it curved over the taut skin of his wrist, the faint veins beneath. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and when she looked up, his face was closer, his breath warm and bourbon, sweet. "Thanks," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before returning to her eyes. "You're full of surprises, Emma." The moment stretched, heavy with possibility, the air between them humming with unspoken questions. Emma felt the heat of his gaze, the weight of his presence, and for a fleeting second, she imagined what it would be like to close the distance, to feel the roughness of his stubble against her skin, the warmth of his hands on her waist. But she pulled back, just slightly, breaking the spell. "We should probably get some sleep," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Big day tomorrow." Daniel nodded, his smile soft, but knowing, as if he felt the same pull and respected her retreat. "Right," he said, standing and setting his glass on the nightstand. "I'll take the chaise. You get the bed, as promised." Emma stood too, her body brushing past his as she moved to her suitcase, the brief contact sending a jolt through her. She glanced at him, catching the way his eyes followed her, the way his lips parted as if he wanted to say something more, but he didn't, and neither did she. As she slipped into the bathroom to change, the door clicking shut behind her, Emma leaned against the sink, her reflection staring back at her cheeks, flushed, eyes bright, lips tingling with the ghost of a moment that hadn't happened. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race, and wondered how she was supposed to sleep with Daniel Brooks just a few feet away, his presence lingering like a promise she wasn't sure she was ready to keep. The Hotel Elysian seemed to hold its breath as the first rumble of thunder rolled over Chicago. a low growl that vibrated through the walls of room 504. Emma Carter stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the city's glittering skyline, now streaked with jagged bolts of lightning. Her auburn hair, loose and slightly tousled from the evening's events, cascaded over her shoulders, catching the dim glow of the bedside lamp like a halo of fire. She had changed into a soft cotton sleep tank and matching shorts, the fabric clinging to her curvature slender waist, the gentle swell of her hips, the long, toned legs that seemed to stretch for miles. At 28, Emma was a vision of effortless allure, her skin glowing with a faint sheen from the humid air, her hazel eyes wide and reflective as they traced the storm outside. Her lips, bare of gloss now, were full and slightly parted, betraying a mix of wonder and restlessness. Daniel Brooks lay sprawled on the velvet chaise, one arm tucked behind his head, the other resting across his stomach. He had stripped down to a fitted black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, the casual attire doing little to hide his physique. His broad shoulders and lean torso were outlined by the snug fabric, the muscles of his arms flexing subtly as he shifted. His dark hair, still slightly mussed, fell over his forehead, and his stormy blue eyes, framed by those unfairly long lashes, watched Emma with a quiet intensity. At 32, Daniel was a study in rugged magnetisms, his jawline sharp, shadowed with stubble that begged to be grazed by fingertips, his lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. The quill tattoo on his wrist peeked out from under his sleeve, a reminder of the stories he wove, both on paper and in the charged silence of this room. His cologne lingered faintly, mingling with the clean scent of his skin, a heady mix that made the air feel alive. The bourbon glasses sat empty on the nightstand, their amber residue glinting like a memory of their earlier toast. The room was a cocoon of warmth and tension, the king-sized bed with its creamy linens looming like a silent invitation, the city lights casting soft shadows across the walls. Emma glanced over her shoulder at Daniel, catching his gaze, and felt a flush creep up her neck. "Some storm," she said, her voice soft but carrying that husky edge, a sound that seemed to wrap around him like silk. "Yeah," Daniel replied, his voice low and warm, like a fire crackling in the dark. He sat up, his movements fluid, the t-shirt stretching across his chest, revealing the faint outline of his pecs, the dip of his collarbone. "Chicago's putting on a show tonight." His eyes lingered on her, taking in the way her tank hugged the curve of her breasts, the way her shorts rode up slightly, exposing the smooth skin of her thighs. It wasn't overt, but his gaze was a caress, appreciative and restrained, making her pulse quicken. Emma turned back to the window, her fingers brushing against the cool glass, leaving faint smudges. "I've always loved storms," she admitted, her tone softer now, almost confessional. "There's something freeing about them, like they wash everything clean." She tilted her head, her hair spilling to one side, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, the faint freckle just below her ear that seemed to beg for closer inspection. Daniel stood, his bare feet silent on the carpet, and moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the cedarwood and leather of his scent. "Freeing, huh?" he said, his voice a low rumble matching the thunder outside. "I always thought storms were about chaos. The good kind, though. The kind that shakes things up." He leaned one shoulder against the window frame, his arm brushing hers, a fleeting touch that sent a spark through her veins. She glanced at him, her lips twitching into a smile. "Chaos suits you," she teased, her eyes flicking to his face, taking in the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his stubble caught the light, the storm in his eyes that seemed to mirror the one outside. "You strike me as someone who thrives in it." He chuckled, a rich, warm sound that made her stomach flutter. "Guilty," he said, turning to face her fully, his body angled toward hers, his hands in his pockets, fingers flexing as if resisting the urge to reach out. "But I'm betting you're no stranger to shaking things up either, Emma Carter." His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, then back to her eyes, the heat in them banked but unmistakable. Before she could respond, a deafening crack of thunder shook the room, followed by a flicker of the lights. Then, darkness. The power cut out, plunging room 504 into a velvet black, broken only by the intermittent flashes of lightning. Emma gasped, her hand instinctively reaching out, finding Daniel's arm. His skin was warm, the muscle firm under her fingers, and she felt him tense, then relax, his hand covering hers in a gentle, reassuring grip. "Looks like the storm's calling the shots now," he murmured, his voice closer, his breath stirring the air near her cheek. In the dark, his presence was amplified, his scent, his warmth, the low timbre of his voice wrapping around her like a blanket. Emma's heart raced, her fingers still curled around his arm, feeling the steady pulse beneath his skin. "Great," she said, her tone half laughing, half nervous. Stranded in a dark hotel room with a stranger. This is how horror starts. Daniel's laugh was soft, intimate, a sound meant just for her. "Stranger? Ouch," he said, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down her spine. "I thought we were past that. Besides, I'm more of a romantic comedy guy." The lightning flashed again, illuminating his face for a moment, his eyes locked on hers, his lips curved in a playful smile, his stubble giving him a roguish charm that made her breath catch. She pulled her hand back, but not too quickly, letting her fingers trail along his arm, a silent acknowledgement of the pull between them. "Let's find some light," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, and moved toward the nightstand, her hands outstretched in the dark. Daniel followed, his steps close behind, his presence a steady anchor in the unfamiliar space. She fumbled for her phone, the screen casting a soft glow as she activated the flashlight, revealing the room in stark contrasts: the bed's crisp linens, the chaise's velvet curves, Daniel's tall frame just inches away. He grabbed his own phone, the light doubling, and they settled on the floor by the window, sitting cross-legged, their knees almost touching. The storm raged outside, rain lashing the glass, but inside, the air was warm, charged, intimate. Emma set her phone down, the light angled upward, casting soft shadows across her face, highlighting the curve of her cheekbones, the gold flecks in her eyes. "Tell me something," Daniel said, his voice low, inviting, as he leaned back on his hands, his t-shirt stretching across his shoulders, the fabric riding up slightly to reveal a sliver of toned abdomen, a faint trail of dark hair disappearing into his sweatpants. "Something real about you." Emma's breath hitched, her eyes meeting his, seeing the sincerity there, the curiosity, the hint of something deeper. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture revealing the delicate shell of her ear, the soft curve of her neck. "Real, huh?" she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Okay, I've always wanted to design a book cover for a novel that changes the way people see the world. Something that makes them feel alive, seen, She paused, her lips curving into a shy smile. That's my dream anyway. Daniel's eyes softened, his gaze tracing her face, lingering on her lips, the way they moved when she spoke, full and inviting. That's a hell of a dream, he said, his voice warm, admiring. I can see it. Your work. It's probably like you. Beautiful, thoughtful, unforgettable. Emma's cheeks flushed, her heart skipping at the compliment, at the way his voice wrapped around the words, making them feel like a caress. Your turn, she said, leaning forward slightly, her tank shifting to reveal the curve of her collarbone, the faint freckle above her breast. Something real, Daniel Brooks. He hesitated, then leaned closer, his elbows resting on his knees, his face inches from hers, the phone's light casting shadows that danced across his feature-she's high cheekbones, the scar above his eyebrow, the curve of his lips. All right, he said, his voice low, almost confessional. I write because I'm chasing something. Not fame or money, but connection. The kind of story that makes someone feel less alone. That's why I keep going, even when it's hard. The vulnerability in his words hit her like a wave, softening her defenses, drawing her in. She studied him, taking in the way his eyes held hers, steady and open, the way his lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say more. The storm outside seemed to fade, the world narrowing to the space between them, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. You're good at this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes flicking to his lips, then back to his eyes, making people feel seen. Daniel's smile was slow, devastating, his eyes darkening with something that made her pulse race. Only when it's real, he murmured, his voice a low rumble, his breath warm against her skin. The lightning flashed again, illuminating the room, and for a moment, they were frozen her, with her hair spilling over her shoulders, her tank clinging to her curves, her eyes wide and searching. Him, with his t-shirt stretched across his chest, his sweatpants low on his hips, his gaze locked on hers, a storm of his own brewing in his eyes. The thunder followed, a deep, resonant boom that seemed to echo the tension between them. Emma's hand moved, almost of its own accord, resting on the carpet between them, her fingers brushing his. The contact was electric, a spark that made her breath catch, her body leaning closer, drawn to him like a magnet. Daniel's hand covered hers, his touch warm, firm, his thumb tracing a slow circle over her knuckles, a silent question in his eyes. We should probably try to sleep, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but she didn't pull away, didn't want to break the spell. Yeah, he agreed, his voice husky, his thumb still moving, slow and deliberate, sending shivers through her. We should. But neither of them moved. The storm raging outside, the darkness wrapping them in its embrace, their hands intertwined, their breaths mingling, the night stretching before them like a canvas waiting for their story to be written. The storm had softened to a gentle murmur by the time dawn crept over Chicago, its first light filtering through the rain-streaked windows of room 504. The Hotel Elysian, once plunged into darkness, now hummed with the quiet restoration of power, the bedside lamp casting a warm, golden glow across the room. Emma Carter stood by the mirror, brushing her auburn hair, each stroke sending waves of copper cascading over her shoulders. She wore a soft cream sweater that hugged her slender frame, accentuating the gentle curve of her breasts and the dip of her waist, paired with dark jeans that clung to her long, toned legs. At 28, Emma was a vision of radiant allure. Her hazel eyes, flecked with gold, sparkled with a mix of contentment and lingering curiosity. Her full lips, bare but naturally pink, curved in a faint, secret smile. Her skin glowed in the morning light, a faint flush on her cheeks betraying the sleepless night, the hours spent in the dark with a man who had become more than a stranger. Daniel Brooks sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, lacing up his boots, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He had changed into a fitted charcoal Henley that molded to his broad shoulders and lean torso, the fabric stretching just enough to hint at the muscle beneath. His dark jeans hugged his thighs, the denim worn in a way that suggested both comfort and confidence. At 32, Daniel was a study in rugged elegancies. Dark hair, still slightly tousled, fell over his forehead, catching the light with hints of chestnut. His stormy blue eyes, framed by lashes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories, flickered with a quiet intensity as he glanced at Emma. His jaw, shadowed with stubble, begged to be touched, and his lips, full and slightly parted, curved into a smile that was equal parts warmth and mischief. The quill tattoo on his wrist peeked out from under his sleeve, a reminder of the writer's soul that had bared itself to her in the night. His scent, cedarwood and leather, now mingled with the clean musk of morning, lingered in the air, wrapping around Emma like a memory she wasn't ready to let go. The room was a tapestry of their shared night, the velvet chaise where they had sat, knees brushing, sharing bourbon and secrets, the window where they had stood, hands touching. As the storm raged outside, the bed, its linen slightly rumpled, a silent witness to the hours they had spent talking, laughing, and dancing on the edge of something more. The bourbon bottle on the nightstand was nearly empty, its amber contents a testament to their loosened inhibitions, their tentative steps toward connection. The air still held a charge, a faint hum of possibility, as if the room itself were reluctant to let them go. Emma caught Daniel's reflection in the mirror, his eyes meeting hers, and felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth that spread from her core to her fingertips. "Power's back," she said, her voice soft, husky from the night's conversations, a sound that seemed to linger in the space between them. "Guess the hotel's ready to fix their mistake." Daniel stood, his tall frame unfolding, with a grace that made her breath catch, his boots silent on the plush carpet. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and warm, like a fire banked, but still burning. "But I'm not sure I'd call last night a mistake." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his Henley clung to the planes of his chest, revealing the steady rise and fall of his breath. Emma turned to face him, her hair spilling over one shoulder, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, the faint freckle just below her ear that seemed to draw his gaze like a magnet. "No," she agreed, her lips curving into a smile, playful but tinged with something deeper. "Not a mistake, just unexpected." Her eyes traced his face, lingering on the sharp angle of his jaw, the stubble that roughened his skin, the storm in his eyes that seemed to pull her in, promising secrets and stories yet to be told. He chuckled, a rich, low sound that sent a shiver through her, his hands slipping into his pee. The storm had softened to a gentle murmur by the time dawn crept over Chicago, its first light filtering through the rain-streaked windows of room 504. The Hotel Elysian, once plunged into darkness, now hummed with the quiet restoration of power, the bedside lamp casting a warm, golden glow across the room. Emma Carter stood by the mirror, brushing her auburn hair, each stroke sending waves of copper cascading over her shoulders. She wore a soft cream sweater that hugged her slender frame, accentuating the gentle curve of her breasts and the dip of her waist, paired with dark jeans that clung to her long, toned legs. At 28, Emma was a vision of radiant allure. Her hazel eyes, flecked with gold, sparkled with a mix of contentment and lingering curiosity. Her full lips, bare but naturally pink, curved in a faint, secret smile. Her skin glowed in the morning light, a faint flush on her cheeks, betraying the sleepless night, the hours spent in the dark with a man who had become more than a stranger. Daniel Brooks sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, lacing up his boots, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He had changed into a fitted charcoal Henley that molded to his broad shoulders and lean torso, the fabric stretching just enough to hint at the muscle beneath. His dark jeans hugged his thighs, the denim worn in a way that suggested both comfort and confidence. At 32, Daniel was a study in rugged elegancies. Dark hair, still slightly tousled, fell over his forehead, catching the light with hints of chestnut. His stormy blue eyes, framed by lashes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories, flickered with a quiet intensity as he glanced at Emma. His jaw, shadowed with stubble, begged to be touched, and his lips, full and slightly parted, curved into a smile that was equal parts warmth and mischief. The quill tattoo on his wrist peeked out from under his sleeve, a reminder of the writer's soul that had bared itself to her in the night. His scent, cedarwood and leather, now mingled with the clean musk of morning, lingered in the air, wrapping around Emma like a memory she wasn't ready to let go. The room was a tapestry of their shared night. The velvet chaise where they had sat, knees brushing, sharing bourbon and secrets. The window where they had stood, hands touching. As the storm raged outside, the bed, its linen slightly rumpled, a silent witness to the hours they had spent talking, laughing, and dancing on the edge of something more. The bourbon bottle on the nightstand was nearly empty, its amber contents a testament to their loosened inhibitions, their tentative steps toward connection. The air still held a charge, a faint hum of possibility, as if the room itself were reluctant to let them go. Emma caught Daniel's reflection in the mirror, his eyes meeting hers, and felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth that spread from her core to her fingertips. "Power's back," she said, her voice soft, husky from the night's conversations, a sound that seemed to linger in the space between them. "Guess the hotel's ready to fix their mistake." Daniel stood, his tall frame unfolding, with a grace that made her breath catch, his boots silent on the plush carpet. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and warm, like a fire banked, but still burning. "But I'm not sure I'd call last night a mistake." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his Henley clung to the planes of his chest, revealing the steady rise and fall of his breath. Emma turned to face him, her hair spilling over one shoulder, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, the faint freckle just below her ear that seemed to draw his gaze like a magnet. "No," she agreed, her lips curving into a smile, playful but tinged with something deeper. "Not a mistake, just unexpected." Her eyes traced his face, lingering on the sharp angle of his jaw, the stubble that roughened his skin, the storm in his eyes that seemed to pull her in, promising secrets and stories yet to be told. He chuckled, a rich, low sound that sent a shiver through her. His hands slipping into his pockets, fingers flexing as if resisting the urge to reach out. "Unexpected's my specialty," he said, his tone teasing but his gaze steady, searching. "You held your own, Emma Carter. I'm impressed." She arched a brow, stepping closer, her jeans hugging her hips, her sweater soft against her skin, accentuating the curve of her waist. "Impressed?" she said, her voice taking on a playful lilt, her eyes locked on his, daring him to match her. "Careful, Daniel. You're starting to sound like you enjoyed my company." His smile widened, revealing a dimple in his left cheek that made her stomach flutter, his eyes darkening with a heat that was both restrained and undeniable. "Guilty," he murmured, leaning in slightly, his breath warm against her cheek, his scent enveloping her like a promise. "You're not easy to forget." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and Emma felt her pulse quicken, her body hyper-aware of his proximity, the way his Henley stretched across his shoulders, the way his lips parted, as if he wanted to say more or do more. She tilted her head, her hair brushing her collarbone, her lips inches from his, the space between them crackling with unspoken desire. For a moment, she imagined closing the distance, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her skin, the warmth of his hands on her waist, the taste of bourbon and morning on his lips. But a knock at the door shattered the spell, sharp and insistent, pulling them back to reality. Emma stepped back, her cheeks flushing, her fingers brushing her hair as if to steady herself. Daniel's eyes lingered on her, a flicker of regret in their depths, before he turned to answer the door. It was Lila, the clerk from the front desk, her face apologetic but professional. "Miss Carter, Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice clipped. "We're terribly sorry for the mix-up. We've arranged a new room for Miss Carter on the 6th floor, and we've comped both of your stays as an apology. If you'll follow me, Miss Carter, I can show you to your room." Emma nodded, her throat tight, a strange mix of relief and reluctance swirling in her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than intended, her eyes flicking to Daniel, who stood by the bed, his hands still in his pockets, his expression unreadable, but his eyes fixed on her. "I'll grab my things," she said, moving to her suitcase, her fingers trembling slightly as she zipped it shut. She felt his gaze on her, warm and steady, and when she straightened, he was closer, his presence a quiet anchor in the room's sudden bustle. "Let me help," he said, his voice low, and before she could protest, he lifted her suitcase, his arm flexing under the Henley, the motion revealing a glimpse of toned forearm, the quill tattoo sharp against his skin. He carried it to the door, setting it down gently, his movements deliberate, as if he were prolonging the moment. Lila waited in the hallway, her clipboard in hand, but Emma hesitated, her eyes meeting Daniel's, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. The night had been a whirlwind, a collision of chance and chemistry, of shared stories and stolen touches, of a connection that felt too real to end here, in the harsh light of morning. "Guess this is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her lips curving into a smile that was both brave and vulnerable, her eyes searching his for a sign, a clue, a reason to linger. Daniel's smile was slow, devastating, his eyes softening with something that made her heart ache. "For now," he said, his voice warm, promising, his hand reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small card, cream-colored with elegant black script, and pressed it into her hand, his fingers brushing hers, warm and deliberate, sending a spark through her. "New York's not that far, Emma. There's a book fair next month. I'll be there signing copies, probably drinking bad coffee. If you're around, find me." She looked at the card, her fingers tracing the embossed letters of his name, the details of the fair printed in neat rows. Her heart raced, a mix of excitement and uncertainty, the weight of his words settling over her like a warm blanket. "A book fair, huh?" she said, her voice teasing, her eyes lifting to his, sparkling with mischief. "You're assuming I'll miss you enough to show up." His laugh was soft, intimate, a sound meant just for her. His eyes locked on hers, the storm in them, swirling with something new: hope, desire, a challenge. "I'm betting on it," he murmured, his voice low and husky, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second, then back to her eyes, leaving her breathless. Lila cleared her throat, a polite but pointed reminder, and Emma stepped back, her cheeks flushing, the card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "Take care, Daniel Brooks," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion, her smile a mix of farewell and invitation. "You too, Emma Carter," he replied, his voice warm, his smile lingering as she turned to follow Lila, her suitcase rolling behind her, the sound echoing in the quiet corridor. As the elevator doors closed, Emma leaned against the wall, her heart pounding, the card still warm in her hand. She glanced at it again, her lips curving into a smile, her mind replaying the night, the way his eyes had held hers, the way his touch had sparked something deep within her, the way his voice had wrapped around her like a promise. New York was a month away, a city of possibilities, a chance to see him again, to discover what lay beyond this fleeting, electric night. But for now, the story paused, a single night etched into her soul, a question mark hanging in the air. Would she go? Would he be waiting? The answers lay somewhere in the future, in a city of dreams, in a moment yet to be written. And if you're wondering what happens next, whether Emma and Daniel's paths will cross again, whether their spark will ignite into something more, stay tuned. The next chapter of their story might just be waiting for you on this channel, where love and chance collide in ways you'll never expect.